in the rush to chat about the NANO Cortex, I think possibly what we might have missed is my buddy Alec Bourne from the MIDI Man Scientist Club kind of said, like, am I right in thinking that this box itself can capture a signal chain? And I was like, yeah, that's exactly. And he's like, well, guitarists are a funny bunch. What are they kind of complaining about? Like, this is pretty big news. The Tonex can't do that. You need to use software. And that whole setup of creating captures with Tonex is way, way longer. It might end up with a more accurate result, and most likely does, actually. And similarly, the NAMM stuff takes quite a while as well to train a model. And again, I think is a little bit more difficult to set up. The Kemper player, which is more expensive than the NANO Cortex, can't create profiles, right? So the NANO Cortex does sit by itself as being essentially the only piece of gear you might need to be able to do some of this capture stuff.
This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
So for example, what might you do with this? You might create captures of your presets. So I think Connor Kaminsky has done a bit of this. I had Adam in my DMs saying that he tried this. He was quite disappointed to start off with, that this couldn't load the plugins. And then I said, you can actually capture these. Check out Connor's video. And then he went and captured like the slow plugin, I think, and that worked really well for him. So I think the fractal stuff, like the FM9 and the FM3, can't do tone matching. The Helix, the HX Stomp can't do it either. The Kemper player can't do it. Of course, the full Kemper can, which you can buy a used one for about the same price as the Kemper player, which is what I ended up doing. Tonex 1 and Tonex pedal can't do it. So this is quite cool from that regard, right? Now, I did want to, before I made this video, actually put my money where my mouth was and try and capture my Friedman Dirty Shirley amp, which is what you heard me going between in the introduction there. Now, I think, if I'm totally honest about this, I think you can hear that there are fairly subtle differences in an A/B test. I think you might be able to pick out which is which. However, I do think that both are pretty good tones, and I think closer than I would get just by tweaking with an actual amp modeler, and I get to that result way quicker. So there is, I think, a benefit to this capturing stuff. The downside with it, I think, is that you don't really know what you're going to get back out of it until you're sort of 5 minutes in the hole. So actually getting this capture to work properly took a little bit of trial and error, and it's a little bit of a, you know, a black box situation. You can tweak the captures afterwards, and I find them to be pretty tweakable and like not sounding crazy different, or I think it's close enough that it's useful, is what I would say. I wouldn't say for me that capturing and profiling is more important than modeling. I actually think probably that the modeling side of stuff gets more accurate over time, but for getting results quickly, the capture stuff I think really does work quite nicely. And to this end, you know, I could have had a capture of this which is maybe what, 95% close, something like that. So a tone that I actually really enjoy playing, and I could also then capture like the pro reverb. So in 10 minutes I could have 2 really useful captures that might be actually perfect for going and gigging live. I've also captured presets from my HX Stomp previously, and that was kind of what my Eric lead is. If you jump into the cloud, you can see that. But I think it is an important little note to say that this is the only piece of gear that can do that still, and for less than £489, I think it's 485 on Toman at the minute. So I think that's worth talking about, and it is really the only thing that the NANO Cortex particularly has going for it. You know, it can't run the amp models. There's very limited effects in there, although I do think the actual effects in here do sound really pretty good, and I really like the delay and the Mind Hall reverb. Particularly, that's what stood out to me when I was trying to play them live. If you're looking to get into this capture world, I think for me, Tonex may be more accurate, but actually navigating the software can be a little bit tricky, and creating your own captures is trickier still. Creating captures with the Nano Cortex or Quad Cortex, jump in the comments and tell me what you think. I think it's relatively easier than that. The Kemper profiling stuff is even easier still, and actually has some really useful on-screen prompts, whereas this one you're a little bit left to kind of trial and error yourself. But you know, I do think that capturing quickly stuff might be really useful for guys that don't want to go down the modeling route, don't want to use a menu. They're really only using this as a means to an end, and I guess what that end is, direct tones. You know, maybe they've been asked not to use an amp on certain gigs, maybe they've got terrible loading, maybe they need a fly rig that is going to be familiar without tons and tons of dialing in. I think the Nano Cortex makes sense for that. There's a whole bunch of people, of course, who will probably be in the comments, hopefully, saying why the Nano Cortex won't work for them. That's, I think, what the Nano Cortex really does quite well, and still quite uniquely. The accuracy of the capturing overall, I think, is debatable. And when they tell you, you know, things like fuzz and tube screamers, it can't do necessarily super accurate captures of, well, that makes me then think, well, to what extent are you really getting that accurate with a tube amp, when tube amps have things like sag that happen over time? They have, you know, elements that are not totally dissimilar to a fuzz pedal. There is some question marks for that for me, but still the only thing, you know, this size that can do that sort of thing, which I think is notable. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And can you tell obvious differences between the capture and the real amp? Did you like either tone? If you like the tones, I can probably find out a way to put them into the cloud. So leave a like, comment, maybe you could use the Buy Me a Coffee link, and I'll be happy to do some more Nano Cortex stuff and create some more profiles. I didn't have a cab on this, so the cab was coming from there, so you need to add your own cab for this particular capture.